understand that reflex means sensory input in and then some kind of response without necessarily involving the cerebrum, okay? Many reflexes are subconscious, all right? So autonomic reflex then means we're not talking about responding to getting burned, okay? That's a typical protective reflex. We're not talking about responding to stepping on a nail. We're talking about when the body experiences an internal change, a reflex that responds to that, okay? And here is one of them, the cardiac center, okay? The basic pace of the heart is set here, and then it is overridden by hypothalamus, okay? So the basic pace of the heart is set in the cardiac center of the medulla oblongata. You could probably guess what that basic pace is, okay? It has actually, what is the basic heart rate in human beings anyway? Average?
60 to 100.
It's 60 to 70 usually, okay? It can go into the 50s, it can go, I mean, when I went over to Arizona and went to like 6,000 feet elevation, my resting heart rate went up by about 5 beats per minute. But here in Cleveland, it's about 58, the typical resting heart rate in me. How do I know that? I wear this stupid thing, so it tells me all the time, okay? So, the cardiac center here is going to set that pace. The heart will set its own pace if the cardiac center is separated from it, okay? But if the cardiac center is active, then it's going to slow the heart rate down a little bit and set a basic pace of about 60 beats per minute or so. In the cardiac center, then there's also something called the cardioacceleratory center and the cardio slowing down center, whatever it happens to be, okay? And so the medulla has the ability to raise and lower the heart rate based on information it receives. The vasomotor center. Motor means muscle contraction. Vaso means blood vessels. Vasomotor, this is a topic that we could talk about for an hour, okay? Your blood vessels are always in a constant state of contraction. The question is, how contracted, okay? If a vessel is this big and blood is moving through it, if it contracts, there is greater resistance to flow, and whatever's downstream gets less blood flow, but whatever's upstream experiences a higher pressure. Do you follow me on that? Okay? So if I close down a blood vessel, I'm going to raise the pressure behind, and I'm going to send less blood to that area. When I start to exercise, I'm probably going to send less blood to my gut. I'm going to shunt blood away from the gut towards muscle. This is vasomotor control. All right? So there is a center that is at least in part detecting blood pressure and detecting blood flow to certain body parts and need, and then controlling the diameter of blood vessels. Very basic stuff. If you can't control your blood vessels, you're probably not going to do well. All right, this is one of my father's problems, is that he gets up from laying down and he cannot control his blood vessels, probably due to both of these systems, okay, not functioning the way they should. Along with the pons, respiratory centers as well, setting pace. All right? You'll notice that the hypothalamus is always the master controller. But in the absence of hypothalamic direct input, these centers will set the basic pace. Down here, you can see that there are other basic activities that go on. I have no idea of the purpose behind hiccuping, so don't ask me why we would have a hiccuping center. I don't know what benefit it is. If anyone has any ideas, please let me know what the benefit of hiccuping is. All right, but all these other things do have some kind of benefit. In particular, this one is huge, and it has to be very controlled. If you don't open up the right holes at the right time, you choke to death. This is very tightly controlled. Go ahead, and I got both of you, so go ahead. Andrew first.
So does someone with bulimia have a problem with the hypothalamus?
I cannot tell you.
I mean,
I can't tell you, okay? I have not looked at that disorder, all right? I did have a student who was bulimic, and that's about all I can say. I know it's not easy to override your revulsion to vomiting, so I think that those folks need to train themselves to be able to tolerate vomiting. This girl, I'll just pass on, she was telling me that that as a result of her bulimia, her teeth enamel, or her tooth enamel was being destroyed by the acids from frequent vomiting. So, yeah. Anyway,
Why would
Lauren.
our hypothalamus not control those? Like how?
oh, it doesn't have to be actively controlling them all the time. Okay, it is in ultimate control. But if the hypothalamus is not modifying the pace set by these things, then they're setting the pace. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but I'm saying like when would that actually happen?
Okay, so these things are setting their pace right now, but then, you know, a family member you haven't seen in 20 years walks through the door and you go, okay, and now the visual input running through the hypothalamus is now altered, okay? When you begin to exercise, these things are going to be affected, and the hypothalamus has ultimate control over the changes for exercise. Yes, Robert?
So the medulla sets like the normal pace.
Right.
It functions all the time.
Yeah.
And then the other part comes in and just does the like deviations from normal.
As far as I understand,
Okay.
okay? I'm assuming that the two are in communication all the time, okay? But one of them is going to override when conditions, when things change in the body, and the hypothalamus is that thing that overrides, yeah.
Wait, so the medulla is the one that controls everything.
It sets a basic pace,
Okay.
and then the hypothalamus will alter the basic pace based on need.
Okay.
It's the medulla's dumb, okay? It sets a basic pace. It's the hypothalamus that collects up this sensory information and decides whether pace needs to be changed or not.
Okay.
Yes, Kimberly.
Sorry to go
It's
back
okay.
so far, but can you repeat what you said about understanding reflex? What you mean by?
Reflexes are kind of automatic sorts of things, and they are very basic. They exist oftentimes for basic survival kinds of purposes, and I'm not sure what else I said. It's just that
Yeah, I don't know.
they, yeah.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get a little bit more as we go. So we don't have to say too much more about these things. Swallowing is very important, and its control is very important. By the way, last thing on swallowing, it is a reflex. Swallowing is a reflex. When you put food in a certain portion of your mouth, a series of reflexive muscular contractions and relaxations occurs. It's a reflex. So it fits along with our understanding of what the medulla can do. Okay? It's basic. Yes?
So like when you sneeze and like you have like I have really bad allergies, how come like the hypothalamus doesn't like stop I guess all the things from flaring up and stuff?
That's
Or
it.
it just doesn't work like that.
I don't know that it works that way necessarily. I know what you say. Every time I sneeze, my nose begins to run. I don't know that that is necessarily something that is neuronal, or if it isn't just something that's going on in my nasal tissue. I can't say for sure. Okay? This is the medulla. The last one then is the cerebellum. We can dispense with the cerebellum fairly quickly. There are a lot of neurons here. Movement of the body is very important. Input from cortex, brainstem, sensory receptors allow it to apply a learned movement to body's current position. Okay? Big set statement. Input from cortex. Cerebrum, voluntary movement, desire, wishes, motivation. Brainstem. Okay? The nuclei we just talked about, the information that's coming in, vestibular nuclei, and so on. Okay? Sensory stuff coming in. Brainstem and sensory receptors. Allows it to apply learned movement to body's current position. one of the examples that I go to oftentimes, because most of the people have seen it, is you look at a professional basketball player like LeBron James. LeBron James has basically memorized the movements necessary to do a layup. Okay? I can imagine that LeBron James could probably do layups blindfolded. Okay, what's that?
Not free throws.
No, definitely not. Okay? But the guy has what they sometimes refer to as muscle memory. He knows how to shuffle the ball from one hand to the other and bring it up. Okay, now here's where that memorized movement is cerebellum. But now the cerebellum has to be able to apply that whether LeBron starts from this position or starts from this position. So the movement is memorized, but the playing of the movement is going to be altered based on body position. And that's why the cerebellum is in that key location where it can get information from above and below and integrate it so that LeBron doesn't fall on his face. Okay? Hopefully that's a decent example for you. All right. You can see its anatomy here. We'll see some of this anatomy in the laboratory. Let's say the key pieces. First off, that it is organized into two sides. All right, so there are cerebellar hemispheres, so we don't get confused if we see that later. Its outer layer, folia is a word for like leaves, okay? So this is gray matter, and the cerebellum is organized similar to the cerebrum, has outer gray matter. The arbor vitae then, inner white matter, very similar to what we see in the cerebrum. The lobes, if you want to know them, there they are, okay? They're not as critical, although if you were really going to study the cerebellum, you would need to know what the different lobes did, or how they were organized and so on, okay? So that's its basic organization, and this is what it looks like. You can see that it is highly wrinkled. It is actually even more deeply wrinkled than the cerebrum is. Because not only do we have wrinkles along a pathway of white matter, but then we have deep furrows within the wrinkles. Anyway, that means lots of neurons. The wrinkled portion is gray matter. I think we can see it best right up in here. There's an outer covering of gray and then an inner branching of white. The central portion of the white branches pretty significantly and goes out to the folia. All right, this is the arbor vitae. Maybe you see a tree of white in there, okay? There is the pathway from cerebellum to midbrain. There's the cerebral aqueduct, there's the midbrain, there's the corpora quadrigemina. There is the pathway of the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata right there. So this thing is pretty well connected to brainstem, and the pathways up and the pathways down. Okay? You have questions about the cerebellum? The next slide is something that I told you about when we were blacked out, so you can take a look at it now if you wish.